All right. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and convene. So, good afternoon, everybody. Very excited to see you all again. Welcome back to our fourth session in the series with our facilitator. You know him, Sean Hartman. He's our Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at Academic Search. And today's topic is about how to position the CV as a mission aligned leader. So, very excited. And Sean, I'm just going to pass it right off to you and get us started.
Well, good to see everyone. Thanks for joining us again. Today's we're trying to pull the threads of the first three sessions. So when we talked about thematics and how to transfer some of the kind of community engagement language into executive language, we're going to try and pull that all together with just some helpful tips. I'm going to refer to it as the CV. I think in academia, most people refer to it. It's a resume, it's a CV, kind of whatever language you want to use is appropriate. And so again, the goal for today is really just to think about those themes from before and then how does it translate into the actual materials. And so we're just focused on the CV today. At the end, we can talk about anything else. But really want to kind of focus in on what's the purpose. All you're trying to do really with this first round is absolutely get your material, get on to the next round. Um, and so what does that do? Demonstrate you meet the requirements. Um, Show the scope and what you've accomplished. And I think that's really, if this is your first time entering kind of the mid-level, senior level searches, this may be the first time for you to look at your resume or CV that's not the bullet points from a job description. I think a lot of us created our bullet points from previous job descriptions. And as we go, as the positions get further back, we tend to trim those bullets. But now we're really looking at our current positions and thinking through kind of some of that back to that executive domain language that we talked about really in session two and transferring some of that language into the executive competencies that you'll see in the profiles. So last week we talked about the profiles. What are we looking for? How do we interpret them? And this is, where we pull all of that together. If if you have the privilege of time and are entering the market, we've talked a little bit about this before. This is one of those areas where you can spend some real time working with mentors, working with others that you respect in the field to help you go through your materials and think through, is it presenting what you want it to present? If we were in person, this is where I would do an exercise where I'd ask you to exchange your CV with somebody and say to the other person, okay, you have 1 minute to read this CV. And then you have to say what, kind of summarize the CV you just read. Because again, what we're looking for is readability. Is it conveying the message? And again, going back to the community engagement work, are we translating that language for folks so they understand the breadth and depth of what you've done? And if you need me to repeat, I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on. If I am breaking up a little bit, let me know. I apologize. Um, I am a traditionalist when it comes to um, CVs. I believe in kind of a chronological order, simple headers. We don't need addresses on the top, by the way. That's one thing just an email and a phone number, LinkedIn or a public profile of some kind. But I'm a big fan of chronological because it's going to answer, for me, it's answering the questions. I want to know where you've come from and where you're at now. And if it's not that administrative CVs or resumes are bad, it's a little harder for me to know your trajectory because we talked a little bit about in those earlier sessions, like what's your leadership arc? What's your story? What are you conveying to folks? And your chronology of your career is your leadership arc. And it's a little hard to get that when it's budgeting, finance, or whatever your pieces were. It's just a little harder. And I think it makes it harder personally, I think it's harder for a search committee to interpret as well. They typically, again, if we go back to think of what the purpose is, it's to show that you meet the requirements. Even though we talk about, no matter how much we talk about trying to, the 7 to 8 years progressive leadership experience, um, no matter how much we talk about that, not having that in a profile, sometimes it's there. So we need to demonstrate that through our CV, that we meet that requirement. And then you can see here, there's just a few. Oftentimes we'll have an official title, but we may have taken on a center, or we may have taken over as an interim in a particular type of role. When it's there, make sure that it's very clear what your primary role was. One of the challenges I see candidates making is with too many of the secondary, ancillary, temporary assignments, if it gets lumped in, it gets really hard to tell whether you're doing it full-time, part-time. And I think this is if nothing else, just getting feedback on your materials. Typically, I will speak from a student affairs perspective, and I think I shared this joke earlier. We spent our entire time listing every presentation or conference we've gone to, every time we've spoken at something. So this document could be super long. Those of you that come from academic affairs, you've been doing the same thing in terms of service, particularly if you were in a tenure or promotion track. You've spent decades in some cases building this one document that back in the day started as a word perfect document for a lot of us and has migrated over the time. So there's just a lot of stuff in there, and depending on what you need some feedback. Is it relevant? Is it something, am I translating? I have found some of the best critiques of CVs or resumes are loved ones, brothers and sisters, if you have adult children, because they don't have any problems hurting your feelings or telling you exactly what they think of the materials. And they will delight in that opportunity to share any feedback with you. But it's also a way, as we talked a little bit on session two, when we break down some of what we did we break it down in a way that resonates with folks? So I'm getting a note that I'm really breaking up and coming back in. Is that
Sounds fine to me.
John, I hear
okay?
you completely, totally on
Okay.
point.
Okay. This is one case where you can't control for audience, but you'll know if you are, if you've traditionally been in academic affairs and maybe making a switch to student affairs, vice versa, maybe you're changing sectors. It's also good to, on the CV, know that audience so that you can use some of the language of the audience, so that you're, again, making that connection, right? The why you, why now, why them. It helps to do that in the CV. When we all list everything we've done, it's a great list, and everybody should keep it forever. I mean, I still have mine. I just found it the other day. I was like, oh, right, I did do all these presentations. I was actually pretty good at NOTA and orientation. But you might need, now that you've moved from more, especially if you're looking at senior executive leadership, it's more moving from management into executive leadership. And so as we track those competencies, so really asking yourself, courses taught, presentations for the folks on the academic side of the house, publications, are they leading to your story? Or are you asking people to read more? Because if you think about the search committees you've sat on, how long of a CV and cover letter do you want to read? And kind of put yourself in the audience. One of my particular little quirks, technical proficiencies, there may be some, Banner, Workday, those types of programs. But if you're still telling me you're proficient in Word, and PowerPoint and those kinds of things, I would just encourage you to think about what is that, because I think it is something at a time when many of us did put that on because Office was new, but have we updated it that, the Microsoft environment's pretty universal in a lot of places. And so is that really kind of something that you want to convey? Or does it date your materials a little bit? Here, just some final thought. If you have a choice or longer than shorter, go shorter. The purpose of your materials is to convince them to give you an interview that you want to talk more. And so really having the conversation with yourself, does this add to them wanting to talk to me? Does this add to my story, my arc? A lot of times on the bullets, we did use for reference a job description or a job posting. And we don't necessarily arrange those bullets in what we had the biggest impact on. So thinking about your bullets in a CV resume of having some of your higher impact things first. If you just think about human nature, we skim and we read less as we continue to go. So don't bury all the good bury. You can tell I'm tired. Don't bury the good stuff at the end. Don't make it your last bullet points. Get it up front when people are reading. And again, I'm a traditionalist. Neat margins, colors, fonts, all of that stuff, depending on who you are and what you want, I actually think it ends up taking space that you can use to convey the message. If it's you and it fits what you do and how you should absolutely do that. But traditionally at the executive level, I've never seen anybody's design work for them. I've never seen somebody's CV that has a lot of design work in it and say, you know what? They knew how to design this resume and we're going to pick them for an interview. It's always the content. And now with all of the AI resume stuff, we're getting into this. I actually think the differentiator is if you have a more traditional CV resume, it's probably going to stand out more because the new resume software is doing a whole bunch of design work that I don't think is necessary. And higher ed, we're not necessarily known for our creativeness in terms of changing. And most people are going into the search committee like every other search committee and looking for kind of a traditional process. And so, again, that's me. You should check that with other search consultants. You should check that with your mentors on kind of what makes sense for you. Question I get, should I have a CV for every search? If you had unlimited time, that would be wonderful, right? You're going to customize that. The reality is, ain't nobody got that time. It just doesn't, just as a practical matter. So I would encourage you to get your CV into a place that you really are proud of it. It really reflects who you are. It really reflects all the stuff we talked about in sessions kind of 2 and 3, kind of the competencies, the executive language. Make sure you're really comfortable with it and tweak it for searches, but spend the time on the cover letter. That's really where I would encourage, instead of trying to customize every single CV, spend more time in the cover letter. And realistically, based on your full-time day job, your full-time parenting or dogging or parents or whatever your others are, you're just not going to have time to customize a CV and a cover letter for every single search. And you're probably just using some of the same language and slightly repackaging it. Most search committees will throw your materials out if they see a mistake on them. I think we can broaden that, academic fairs is probably the strictest, and then it moves down a weighted continuum where some search committees are willing to give more grace. If an executive search firm is involved, I've almost universally seen the committees, nope, they have a mistake, they're out. Even though we try and say, was there nothing else here? Is the mistake the only thing you can see? Was there nothing else here about what they've accomplished? Because as we talked about in session 1, The search process is designed to take people out of it, not put people into it. So once you have your pool, the only thing you're doing is cutting people. So if you could, I think most people default to, oh, error, out, because I have these other ones I now need to read. So just don't give them that opportunity. Try and have folks proofread it. Spend some time with it yourself. And again, I think this is where the feedback really helps in terms of did you convey it appropriately? And then the difference in the CV and the cover letter. The CV is really your past. It is about your accomplishments. It's about where you've been. The cover letter is all about the future. The why you, why now, why then. Why do you want to do it in their space? What's the mission alignment? Pulling in the stuff we talked about last week from the profiles and taking those profiles. I like to think of the cover letter as your prose. That's where you get to weave the story built on the leadership agenda that's in the profile, if a search firm's doing it, or the job description. The CV is your citations. That's the evidence that you were able to get it done. I can do this, and then the CV backs up that kind of work. So thinking about the two documents. Again, the purpose of the two documents is to get them interested in you enough to have you in for an initial conversation. That's the goal. So that was really fast. So, what questions? Or disagree? Hey, Chris.
Thanks, Sean. That was great. For the cover letter, about what's average length on that, would you say?
I am a fan of 3 to 5, no more than if you particularly, I think about the search committee again, right? I do this from the systems, the operations side of thing. Search committees don't want to be reading much more than that. I think it gets really hard. Most leadership agendas are about 4 to 5 bullet points of like, we'd like this person to do this. These are the things to look forward to. The job description's usually built into about 4 or 5, and you figure, kind of a third of a page, half a page for each of those gets you in that three range.
Gotcha. Thank you.
CVs, I think it really depends on the content. And it really depends on your own career kind of trajectory. Um, I mean, I saw a 42-page presidential CV with a 22-page cover letter, and that's who they picked because they were a talented writer that could speak to mission. I mean, they lost me at about three pages in. But for this committee, having this deep, I mean, it was a religiously affiliated institution. So having this very deep kind of language of the cover letter won them over. So again, trying to figure out what search committees do, I would do something else if I had that magic wand, because you never know. The only thing you can do is be you. So, I mean, I think for most folks applying for senior management, it's probably 8 to 10 pages CV if you have enough history. But if it's shorter than that, that's okay too. Did you have you highlighted what they're looking for, either in the job description they post or the profile if a search firm's doing it?
Stephanie, I see you're off mute. Do you have a question or a thought?
Um, yeah, first of all, this is great as always. I'm I don't have a specific question, but I wonder if you would talk about LinkedIn. Because, I know from the perspective of being a hiring person, I'm on LinkedIn every day looking into people. And I think the content there obviously needs to match, but seems there's a lot of expectation around really, building your profile through regular posting and all of that. So be interested in your take on how that's factoring into today's searches.
Yeah. I mean, you can be, if a search firm is involved, you can expect we're going to have some AI powered social media, internet search product that we use in all of our searches. I mean, almost every search organization I know does. So ours will, look at the internet and social media. So a couple things on that. One is if you have social medias, it's okay to lock those down and make them not public. If you are commenting on things, know that your likes and comments can show up, even though yours is locked down, they can still appear for others. So we just had a situation where there were some questions on temperament and judgment, and based on their social media behavior, even though theirs was locked down, the search committee determined that it was not a good fit for the institution because it backed up. They just had this little niggly thing. So I think so LinkedIn is one of those. I think if you have the capacity to do it, I think it is good to add. I will tell you the secret. I think most people go and look at your jobs and your education history. And so I think they're focused more on that than necessarily the content of what you're posting. So making sure that what you've done, your position doesn't have to be exactly like your CV, but I think spending some time cleaning up something, if there are some gaps where maybe something just wasn't, I think spending some time there to clean them up. But I think most of us, I very rarely look at what somebody's post that doesn't show up in like the first two or three. I am going in to look, does their job history match what's on the CV? What's where that, like, well, wait a minute. They didn't tell me they worked at this institution. Why is that not on their CV? So I think so for us, from a search firm perspective, that's what we're using LinkedIn for more than, and have they publicly put out, if you've put in your materials, I've gotten a $50 million award. Is that anywhere in there? Like, have they publicly said that elsewhere? Because is that I got a $50 million, I led the effort, or the institution got the $50 million award, and I just happened to be there for the big check that we all seem to present at those things. So I think that's consistency, making sure things match, education. And I think, particularly like on education, you have an option to hide, at least you did, hide the years of your award, of your degrees. I would also encourage you to do that as well. I think it's just good standard. I don't think anybody needs to look up your degree years to make any assumptions. So I think it's a little bit harder in the positions, obviously, because those are chronological, but so you can make some inferences. But I have the other thing about LinkedIn is if you have military service, some people don't always put their military service on their LinkedIn, but if it's on the CV, I think it's a good idea to have it there as well, depending on kind of your roles and because that's just one of those pieces we're gonna have to verify. And if it shows up in one place and not the other, the only thing about it, I was just trying to think through when people move up. So if somebody's been moved to special assistant, I think when they've had, they're going to be a special assistant, a new created role. Sometimes LinkedIn doesn't always present it as clear. So just thinking how it's presented, so you may not want to put all of your, like if you've taken on like 1 or 2 year directorships or special projects, you may not want to put all of those in there on LinkedIn just because it makes it very crowded and it's actually hard to flow. If you can, I would encourage, for those of you that have been utility players where you have consistently moved up, you started here and you just keep doing all these other roles. I think that is good to show because I think it shows that you're a utility player. I think some people are like, well, how do I say? I think you demonstrate. I kept getting promoted. They kept asking me to do more things. They kept doing, well, let me rephrase that. Hopefully you got a promotion and not just have to do more things. But as you've taken these things on, I think it's good to demonstrate, yeah, I'm here to do the work. And here are all the different things I've done.
I have a question that I hope isn't too singular to my own experience. I'm looking at those of us in the call, and I think this might be true of a few of us. As I've moved forward in my career, I feel like I've gotten into and am currently in a role where there are a few things for which I am directly responsible for the implementation and success. But there's a much wider array of work that I'm doing where I'm more of a broker, a convener, an enabler. And it's harder for me sometimes to put my thumb on, and this directly led to the $50 million grant, right? It's just not as concrete as that. What it has led to is, and I'll give you an example, right? It's dramatic leaps in terms of reach and relevance within our public stakeholders, as an example, right? I think there's ways to get there to articulate those outcomes, but they feel a little bit more squishy than the work that I used to do as a university-wide subject matter expert, where I could say we re-envisioned the core curriculum for the institution and implemented, right? It feels different, and I'm curious what advice you might have on how to characterize that in a CV.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the kind of those session two where we talk about those core competencies and seeing how it's reflected in the profiles of some of those aspirant positions you may want to consider. Because I think what people are looking for is how you led. I mean, yes, they're looking for the outcomes, but it's, led the task force on, I'm just, blue and gold, led the blue and gold task force on X, developed, you know, and then what the outcome is. And I think we have to be okay being able to, because the likelihood is you're going to be doing, I mean, you all know the more you move up, the more squishier it does get, right? Because you are leading more, you're visioning more, you're doing more of those things. And so people want to see those reflected. So I think it's okay to try and what's the language you're comfortable in, of led a task force that examined X, which led to, so led the community engagement task force, led to, the committee or the school, whatever the language is, securing $50 million grant over, after 3 years, led to $50 million worth of grant. Because again, it's how does it tie back, right? And how does it, but without, and I will say that this is also an area, I think I've said this before, women and particularly candidates of color also tend to couch language more in the we, us, in the kind of in the broader sense. And this is one where I would push people to really understand what you've led on and claim that space. I led the task force. The task force got a $50 million grant. It doesn't have to be that you did it, but it's because of your leadership, you empowered people to do that. So I still think it gets to the same thing. Not sure that's a great answer. It's a long answer, but I'm not sure. But I think it is examining kind of what was your role in it and then just being clear. Tasked by the president to lead the task force on community engagement. The community engagement task force secured a $50 million grant. And then having that time to talk about that later.
Yeah, I'm going to add to that, Sean. I think that's one of the critical things, especially people that work in university engagement, because I spent a lot of my life in that. And I had a really good friend who is a sitting president right now, who I visited with recently, who is doing a remarkable job. And I worked with him at one time, so I'll let y'all figure out where I was. And he enumerated to me the things that I had been involved in directly that had actually created the success they're having now. And to have him say that sounded a whole lot different than me saying that
Yeah.
because my nature is not to take any uh, credit that I'm not directly responsible for. It's exactly what we were talking about there. And I think that's a really careful nuance, and because you certainly don't want to overstate, but I think people that tend to be in these arenas tend to understate. Because I can show, in fact, after he said that to me, and I went back and looked, because I sat on two university cabinets, a system cabinet and a university and a land grant university cabinet at the same time. And he looked at me, he said, you had as much to do with that as anything. And he was talking about enrollment, he was talking about incredible research growth, he was talking about state and federal appropriations. He went down the list. He said, there's nobody that we had at the time that did any more than you did. He said, you need to own it and take it. And it really struck me because I had never thought about that. And I think that's something that we have to get better at. I think people in this space of work um, tend to be very serving driven, and it's what got us to where we are. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think when you're in the competitive race for the kinds of roles that many of you probably on here seek or think about seeking someday, you got to go for it. You got to go for the jugular. And when you get in there, and once you get in the mix, and I think that's what actually keeps people from getting in the mix, is that piece, because it doesn't come through necessarily in the CV. And so you have to figure out how to nuance it in the letter because that captures their attention. There has to be some way to hook it. And if you can hook to it, then they'll say, well, I want to know that he really do that or she really do that. Well, that gets you in the interview because then they're getting to ask you. The only way they're going to ever know is to ask you. So I
Right.
guess what I've learned in that is that nuance. Because I do think there's a lot of people in this space who do incredible work that get $100 million and billions of dollars over time, and they are not comfortable in that space of nuancing that to the point that you can at least get over the hump and get into the mix. Once you're in the mix, then it's game on, whatever
Right.
can happen there. Does that make sense?
I think so I'm going to go from the cynical side of that, which is often search processes reward the best game show host. They don't reward the best candidate. So that's the cynical side, I think, Marshall, of what you were saying, which is those that can sell themselves, those that created energy, those that really kind of command. Some of it's innate and some of it's truly them. So I don't want to disparage candidates, but I do think those that are better to own and claim their victories do end up portraying a little bit more confidence, a little bit more command, because they're always wanting to see you in the role. So if you're going for an SVP, a presidency, whatever your next is, when you command that space and own your successes, people follow up with that. So I do think absolutely. And those that can follow them up, right? Be able to really say this is what happened, because also the work that you all do, it is time, right? Like it does take time to build community relationships. It does, those that you that have government relations or those, it takes time. Sometimes it has to take for a city council to turn over before, but you help, whatever your pieces were. Yeah, the city council didn't turn over for another 4 years, but all your stuff finally got passed on the first day of the next city council because the new one came in, right? So I think there's all of these pieces in owning that. And people want to know that you can do that. They want to know that you're in it because, again, people want to know, are you coming to them to stay, or are they a passover? And so saying, look, I invested in this institution. I spent 4 years working with the city council to get this done. Now it just got implemented this year, but that groundwork was laid over a really defined, we worked really hard at that. And that's okay. So I agree, Marshall, 100% agree.
I just to maybe build off of that with a question, I tend to talk about more of those things in a cover letter as opposed to a CV where I feel like I have an opportunity to elaborate a little bit more on maybe my process or how things were done or other things that wouldn't come across in a concrete bullet or statement. But I was really struck by your framing of the CV versus cover letter and how much is past evidence versus cover letter being more forward looking. And I guess maybe, part of it was about your story, and maybe that's what it is a little bit, but I'm just wondering if you can elaborate a little bit more on maybe how that framing or concept works well, or I might be totally backwards on, how to use the space best to convey some of that.
Yeah. Um, and depending on where, we can talk a little bit more about cover letters next week too, if you want to do that a little bit more in depth. Um, so for me, the frame of the cover letter is the prose, the CV is the citations. Are your bullet points? You might talk about process, but you're not going to get that because you only have so many pages, right? So you're going to have a limited amount of space to convey. So you want to be able to hit the big pieces, right? To be able to write some paragraphs that draw upon those things and are able to um, really put together the story. So how did all of this? Why you? It's not that, and I think we talked, it's not that you created an executive MBA or created this certificate. It's that you have the skills, gifts, and graces to do it because you're going to do it in their context. And so I think having the really specific, led this, ran this, did this in the CV, and then the cover letter is how you pull that all together. I've always loved in community engagement. This is where my passion has been. I want to do it in your context, and here's what I'm bringing with me. Understanding on how to create coalitions, understanding of how to do this, a desire to do this in your context. And so kind of go. So I think as many of those bullets as you can get on your CV to demonstrate accomplishment and what you did and what you got done are important. And the other piece is you can't control for whether somebody reads the CV first and then the cover letter or the cover letter then the CV. So while they shouldn't be repetitive, like you don't want to, bullet for bullet, right? But you also need enough in your CV. So I will tell you, I read CVs first. So I want to see what's there because then I know what I want to look for in the cover letter. Some people are the exact opposite. They want to hear the nice story first. I want to see that you met what I want to see that you met what I need out of you, and then I want to hear the nice story. Other people want to hear the nice story and then make sure that they can back it up. So because you can't control, making sure you have enough, have those bullets in case they are a CV first. Some people I would say are even cynical that if they don't like the CV, they don't read the cover letter. And so it's a way, because some of these pools, I will tell you, some of our pools are still in the 80, 90. We did the HERS search for here this past fall. We had over 400 sets of materials submitted for that job. So you don't have a choice but to prioritize. And if you read that CV and you weren't, it didn't say what you want, if you didn't find what you needed, then you didn't, because you just didn't have the time, right? So I think there's a practical piece. So I think having as many bullets as you can in your CV that are, impactful, make sense. And then the cover, it's this why you, why now, why there. Others.
I have a bit of a more meta question. So I've been on two different search committees recently. One for a university-wide center. So this is a pretty powerhouse research. Actually, Sean, Academic Search handled the search, and it was a remarkably successful search. You had great people on that. Another for our provost. And in both instances, the pools were really good, which emboldens a search committee, right? You've got great quality people coming in the door. In both instances, the committee trended toward building an expectation that we almost would have somebody that had already been a provost, who had already been a university center director, right? Because you've got such a high quality pool, there starts to become that tendency of, well, not looking for the candidate that could do, right? Has all the great building blocks, could do, but instead has already done. And in both instances, I found myself paused by that and a little, I'm curious if that's typical, if that's unique maybe to my setting. And if that's the case, and we really are looking for a next move kind of position, one that we've not already occupied, how do you suggest we articulate ourselves in a way that helps people to see us best in that role?
Yeah, I think AAU R1's flagships have a very different pool when it comes to who's applying to those positions. As most people, it's either the next logical, they've been serving at a similar institution, they're looking to move up, or it's folks that have maybe been serving, just below that and are moving up. So I think those tend to be, so I think the R1s definitely do tend to go with experience a little bit more than others, because I think the pool, in most cases, for senior leadership, I'm not going to say center directors, but I'm going to say senior leadership, the salaries tend to be a little higher. There's a reasons for that. Um, Honestly, I think the core of it's prestige bias at the end of the day. I think when you break all of this down, I think it's prestige bias. And you see it moving sectors. I mean, we see it from somebody that's maybe going from a flagship or an R1 down to, maybe they want to go to the regional comprehensive. The regional comprehensive does the exact opposite, which is, well, they couldn't ever understand us. So they can't come here. They won't know what it's like to work on a small campus. When you all know better than I, how under-resourced most departments and staff are. Um, so I think it works, and I think it's prestige bias at its core. I think the real question is, if it's a there are some search organizations that are doing kind of the corporate recruiting where they're only recruiting 10 to 12 people, and that's all they're putting forward as a slate. There are others like Academic Search that still do an open call for nominations and recruitment. And so I think it is tough. I think because the pools are still good. Do not believe what you've read in the press. I think pools are still mostly for most senior leadership positions are still very competitive. Because as we talked about, there are still good people wanting to do good things. But I think it is about answering that why them, why now, why you question though. You've got to anticipate those questions and say, here's what you're looking for, here's what I deliver. And this goes back, we talked in the first, how you need to protect yourself a little bit too emotionally, in terms of, we just had a presidential search close with 137 applicants. 42 were from sitting presidents because it was a confidential search. It just produces a different type of pool when it's confidential. So in that case, it's not about you, and that's what protecting yourself, that doesn't really have anything to do with you. It had to do with the over. Now, fortunately for them, they said we don't want all sitting presidents in this pool. That search committee intentionally looked at it saying, okay, we have a certain number of sitting presidents, we want a certain number of provosts. And then and then this committee, and it said, this pool does not reflect our students, and who would reflect our students. And also, after they made initial selections, went in and added 3 additional interview slots to round out the pool to make sure that the whole semifinalist pool looked like their closer to what their students were. Not every search committee, depending on who it is, who's the search committee, is it the 5 board members? Presidentials are a whole beast in and of themselves, but everybody had to get and so the question is, how much fortitude, how are you preparing yourself for the search, and where are you looking, and how do you adjust? What flexibility do you have? People that are geographically based, people that are in crisis, your job's ending, there's just less ability to have some of these kind of thoughtful. There's not as much time to talk to your family. There's not as much time to figure things out when you're in a crisis mode too. So I think being sensitive to folks that are in that crisis too. But my last thing, we also statistically know that women tend not to apply to an opportunity unless they feel they've met 80% of the criteria. Men will typically apply to the opportunity if they've met 20%. So I would also, that inner voice, that inner critic, I don't want to claim all the credit, I don't want to do this, it also keeps people from applying to opportunities to see how they do. And I would just encourage anyone, if something looks interesting and you think you can do a good job and you have the bandwidth to think about the opportunity. So 2 minutes over. Sorry.
Well, Sean, once again, great session. And thanks to all of you for your wonderful questions and offerings. We have one more to go. Is that right, Sean? We've got one more to go. Do you want to? I'm not going to do that to you. I was going to ask you to tell us what's coming next, but I think.
Well, so we can make some adjustments. Do you want to talk about cover letters next week? Is there something else on y'all's minds that to cover? We can do just a whole Ask Me Anything, which is more of an open-ended, I might give a few closing, remarks and then Ask Me Anything. We could do cover letters. What would be helpful for you all?
I think more on cover letter wouldn't be bad, but I would also be interested in the actual interviews at the executive level. And, I think we've all been involved with searches at various levels, but what are the unique elements and unique dynamics to the executive level interview?
Good. We'll work on that and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Great.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Have a
Thank
great
you.
afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. See
Thanks,
ya.
everyone. Thank you.